Hello and good evening, everyone, to the webinar on dams development and the Teesta flood. As everyone in this company I'm sure is aware uh, that the devastation which has been wreaked at in Sikkim during the because of the outburst which happened and then the dam collapse. That's something which is it's an ongoing devastation. And we gather today here in solidarity as well as to hear some of the voices which are affected and voices which have been raising which issues of environmental ecological damage of communities being affected. So we will be hearing those voices today. Um, So just to inform you, we will be having Mayalmit Lepcha from affected citizens of Teesta with us today. But so the last conversation which we had with her, she's there at Chungthong, which is a village near the Teesta 3 hydel project, which collapsed, the dam which collapsed, and is part of the rescue operations as well as meeting the communities there. So owing to that, she has not joined up till now. We are trying to reach her on phone because her phone is unreachable. The moment we reach her and she's able to connect, we'll connect with her. So uh, so yeah, I yeah, that's correct. So we have not been able to call her. Some of the people are messaging me as well. So hopefully she's fine and safe, and we'll be able to have her on this meeting today. We had a call with her yesterday, so hopefully she'll join. So to begin with, to begin with, we uh, we are really happy and pleased to have a very distinguished set of panelists among us today. Um, so Mayalmit will hopefully be joining. She's an indigenous women human rights defender from the Lepcha indigenous community itself, and she comes from the Zongu region, which is at the center of the events which have happened. She has also been the General Secretary of Affected Citizens of Teesta. We also welcome Neeraj Vagolikar. He's a member of the Kalpvriksh Environmental Action Group. And over the years, his research has focused on laws and policies related to environment and forests. He has looked at social impacts of development projects and issues related to environmental governance, especially those which are associated with large infrastructure projects. Uh, we also have Dr. Rinan Shah among us. She is the co-founder of Reading Himalaya. Reading Himalaya is an independent research and policy consultancy. It it focuses on the Himalayan society, environment and development and politics. She completed her PhD from Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment in Bengaluru. And she has also been a fellow with the National Mission on Himalayan Studies and has also been a contributing author to Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, one of the working groups. And then we have amongst us Manshi Asher. Manshi has been an activist of environmental justice and a researcher. She has produced a very prolific body of work, and we benefit from her commentaries and her views on what is happening especially in the Western Himalayas. She has been associated with several organizations and campaigns and regarding land, water, and forest rights. She has also extensively documented and written on the economy of this neoliberal developmental policies in Himalayas. Manshi will give a view of how to look at how to look at how to look at the intersection of Himalayas and development, especially grounding her narrative in the Western Himalayan perspective. So I welcome all of you. We are really pleased to have you amongst us, and thanks for agreeing to come and speak at a short notice. So, so what we know is, what we do know is that what is being reported is that there was a cloud burst which led the to the glacial outburst flood, which then led to the washing away of the dam, the Teesta 3 hydro project. And as some of the people gathered here, they would probably know that the affected citizens of Teesta has been raising some of these issues, precisely these issues. Hopefully, Mayalmit will be able to join and talk about them in detail, because this is something which was anticipated. The construction of large dams in a topography which does not support this kind of infrastructure is something which the local communities there, some of the experts, especially some of those who are on the panel today, they have been forewarning us about such development and and the danger which it poses to the communities, because probably the construction of the dam and the reservoir which was there owing to the dam, probably it exacerbated the effects of what is being called as the outburst and then leading to this. So, Neeraj, can I request you to go first and perhaps give some account of things which are happening there, because you have had extensive experience there and Mayalmit has not joined us so far. Hopefully, we'll be able to reach out to her in the duration of this webinar. So would you like to go first, give the audience an idea of some of the devastation which has happened? And we would also want to know that what probably has led to these kind of events, because we know that the processes which are there, the environmental assessment, the consultation which happens with communities, probably there are a lot of flaws there, and it has greatly contributed to this situation. So,
Yeah.
Neeraj, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Amitanshu. So, Amitanshu, so in case Mayalmit joins us, the actual ground situation of what's happening right now, let's wait for her to tell us. What I try to do, since this issue can be addressed from multiple angles, and my experience has been over the last 2 decades to look at environmental governance for large hydropower in the eastern Himalayas.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to look at the specific got washed away, 1200 megawatt Teesta 3. What are the different issues which came up, how they were dealt with? Some of these facts have already been put out by the affected citizens of Teesta. And I'll, of course, be relying on a lot of their work because that's what I have documented or witnessed over the years. So just to go back, though the glacial lake outburst flood is there, gradually we'll come to know exactly what happened, what are the additional compounding factors, rain, or whether there was an avalanche in the glacial lake, or that will come later. But this broadly addresses the issue of, I'm now going back, that while recent reportage has focused a lot on how the Central Water Commission or other scientists have been warning us about glacial lake outburst floods in North Sikkim. And that's great that this literature is coming out. But some people are interpreting this to say that, okay, all this information is available now, but back then in 2005-6, when this project got environmental clearance, were these factors known? So I just want to give that sort of an historical understanding also, that the first major project in the Teesta Basin on the main Teesta River was the 510 megawatt Teesta 5 project. On its tributary Rangit, there was another project before. And when this project was granted environmental clearance, it was granted clearance under the condition that no other project in Sikkim will be considered for environmental clearance till a carrying capacity study of the Teesta River Basin will be done. This was May 1999. And from 2001, this study started. The coordinating agency was the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies in Mountain and Hill Environment, Delhi University, but there were multiple players involved, including Salim Ali Center for Ornithology and Natural History, North Bengal University, IIT Delhi, so there are several agencies involved. And I was just looking at some of the stuffs have already been put out by ACT. So I'll also refer to that. That right since the early days of this study, they were in their steering committee meetings where all these multiple agencies, the Ministry of Environment, Sikkim government were getting together. The whole issue of glacial lake outburst floods as a threat was well documented. Okay, so just want to put this, and in fact, the ACT put out a statement where they referred to a particular meeting in 2005. And why do they say that? Because this project actually got environmental clearance in 2006. And so there was this public hearing, environmental public hearing for this project on 8th June 2006 in Chungthang. And even in that public hearing, members from the affected citizens of Teesta had raised the broader issue of how the existing draft actually at that time it is not be called draft, but environment impact assessment report was so poor on what they broadly called environmental risk assessment, which is considering the hazards in the Himalayas. And they specifically mentioned many of these risks, including the risk of glacial lake outburst floods, how that could impact the project either under construction or when commissioned, and how the project could magnify some of these impacts. So these broad areas were raised from the public hearing itself. And in the response to that, the company said, no, don't worry. We are already planning this project for a probable maximum flood of 7,000 cubic meters per second. So the dam can accommodate these floods coming from the upstream. And what they, in a sense, misled the audience was that the probable maximum flood estimation, which they were referring to, was only based on rainfall events, not due to glacial lake outburst floods added to it. And that's a fact which actually they should have been looking at the possible floods due to multiple factors when specifically this issue was raised. Later on, the affected citizens of Teesta challenged the environmental clearance to this project before what was then called the National Environmental Appellate Authority. And in that also, they very specifically raised the issue of environmental risk assessment, including with the specific mention of glacial lake outburst floods and potential threats. I'm repeating this because in the current context, that's the thing which has come. And there's a dangerous tendency to say, you know what, this was unprecedented, so we couldn't have predicted this and we couldn't have planned this. But these were concerns raised from the beginning. In response to them, whether it was the Ministry of Environment of the company or the final order of the appellate authority which dismissed their appeal, was totally silent. They vaguely said, no, there's some risk assessment done and all that. But they didn't even write a single line on the risks due to glacial lake outburst floods. And you know, an interesting part, as I said, the spillway capacity in the dam to carry floods was planned at 7,000 cumex, which was conservative without looking at possibility of glacial lake outburst floods. So in a sense, right from the beginning, we were setting us up ourselves for disaster. And later on, a very interesting thing happened, which very few people know till ACT also put out their information recently, that once work started, very often in Himalayan dams, due to the geological challenges you face, you need to modify designs, but that is with prior permission of the central agencies which govern it. But in 2008, the Central Electricity Authority discovered that the company had unilaterally changed the design on the project under construction and reduced the spillway carrying capacity. The way it was going ahead, it would have reduced the spillway capacity from to carry floods from 7,000 cumex to more than almost by 60% to 3,000 cumex. And the Central Electricity Authority stepped in and asked them, you can't do that. The issue was also discussed by the Expert Appraisal Committee on River Valley projects. And eventually, they were allowed some design changes, but they were not allowed to reduce the spillway capacity. Now, why am I saying all this? on the one hand, upfront during the decision making period, you say, don't worry, we've got this capacity of 7,000 cumecs. Once work starts, completely oblivious of the threats of floods, you actually drastically reduce the capacity. Luckily, the central agencies at that time stopped this reduction, though there were changes in the design, but still that capacity was still less to accommodate floods of this thing. Now, environmental risks in the Himalayas, which are well known, are directly translate into economic risks, as we have seen that now. But this was happening even in the even before this disaster. So this project, as many of you all know, was already a white elephant that was promoted by private agencies, and though it was a initially, now it's under the control of the Sikkim government, the majority stake, but initially the Sikkim government had only 26% and the rest was with the private players. And when there were repeated cost escalations in the project, the private players didn't show up, and for the equity which they needed to after the second cost escalations, and the project was going to go bust. That's where the Sikkim government had to step in and take over the project, which initially started at some 5,000 odd crores and eventually finished construction at 14,000 crores. So in this period, some of the reasons for the cost escalations were these hazards in the Himalayas, which otherwise are treated as acts of God, but they are known. This is exactly what ACT was saying upfront. You've not done environmental risk assessment and impacts of these risks on both environment, people, as well as the economic viability of these projects. So in 2011, there was an earthquake. 2012, there were flash floods. So every time they were saying that, we had to increase the price of this project. These are two factors amongst others, which they cited as reasons for cost escalations. Okay. And then now I'll just share some of the things that, some of us are hoping that after, despite the horrendous disaster, will we learn lessons and there'll be a change, there'll be greater caution in setting up these hydropower projects and doing these impact assessments. But sometimes I'm cynical because the whole political economy of building these hydropower projects is such that I'll just share other things which have happened in the environmental decision making in the Teesta Basin after this project was under construction. So this Teesta Basin carrying capacity study got completed in 2007. And though it raised issues of glacial lake outburst floods, it made one recommendation that the riverine stretches upstream of this project, which broke Teesta 3, there should be no projects allowed there. So they said no projects north of Chungthang. Okay. And they raised many things. One of the justifications were also because of the risks due to glacial lake outburst floods and other things, amongst many, because issues are many, ecological, social, there are various issues. Now, the Ministry of Environment and Forest issues an order saying, okay, now no projects allowed upstream, but because Sikkim government had gone ahead and signed some MOAs, memorandum of agreements, what Sikkim government does is 2009 does a appraisal or a critique of the carrying capacity study. So what it does is it doesn't critique the part where the carrying capacity study allows hydropower projects. It only critiques the part where hydropower projects are not allowed. Okay. And then they make a presentation to the Ministry of Environment in 2010, January. And in that critique, there's this entire section called GLOF vis-a-vis development activity. So glacial lake. So they are saying that, let us still build hydropower projects north of Chungthang because we can actually design it safely. Two is what they also say is that actually these high probable maximum floods and glacial lake outburst floods are unlikely to coincide at the same time. So we are unlikely to get a very big flood. So let's not be over conservative. And then they also lay out some things that there are advantages of having dams like structures in the upstream areas which are likely to be hit by glacial lake outburst floods. One of the arguments they're saying that these further movements will be blocked, okay, of debris and other things, and which seems in a sense a foolish argument, because as you saw in the Teesta 3 project, the dam got broken, and in addition with the debris and the logs and the boulders, you had this 60-meter high dam, the concrete of that's like a 20-story building going further downstream and going further. So just to add a little more, so one would have thought that for later, more recent projects, this something is learned. But again, between this project which broke and another project downstream, there's a proposed project called 520 megawatt Teesta 4. It's not built. Okay. And just to tell people who are hearing, the project below it, 510 megawatt Teesta 5 project of NHPC, was also badly damaged. Not the dam structure, but the spillway gates, the powerhouse. It's now out of action. It will require a long time to get it up and running again. Now, in Teesta 4, also the EIA report chose not to mention GLOFs, despite the report being done by the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies in Mountain and Hill Environment, which had done the carrying capacity study and raised concerns about GLOFs, that they chose to be silent on GLOFs in their report. Again, the ACT challenged this in the National Green Tribunal. In this case, the Ministry of Environment said, yes, it's true, no study has been done. NHPC, the proponent of that future project, said, you know what, impact of GLOFs will be in the upstream. It's unlikely to impact this. This is in their affidavits. And so it's so naive, because you've seen how it has to carry through down. The river waters can't just disappear somewhere along the way. And again, in the NGT judgment, though they do pay some lip service to concerns about GLOFs, they don't ask for these studies to be done. They dismiss the appeal, a bench which included a Sikkimese judge, Mr. Wangdi. And so really, Amitanshu, I won't go longer because there's a lot to cover and one can go on. So I think I might have finished 12 minutes, right? Yeah? Yeah.
No, I think that's fine. You can take some more time.
Okay. So I'll briefly, then there are other issues. I just saw Himanshu Upadhyay is also amongst the listeners, that the Comptroller and Auditor General at various times raised many issues, including when I say the hazards here. Now here in the Teesta 3 case, we had a case of a completely commissioned project where the dam broke, okay, where now there were cases which the CAG highlighted, like the Teesta 5 project under construction. The debris which had been taken out from the tunneling, what is called muck in the official terminology, but it actually includes the rock and others which is taken out from the tunneling, had occupied more than half the river course. And there was a flood at that time, and one bridge in the downstream broke, and the CAG had really pulled up NHPC for endangered ecology due to the manner in which the environmental management of their project. So just I think I'll end here, but with a broader point that I am hoping that what has happened changes things, but I'm very skeptical, because despite this is an issue not only about the ecological impacts and the social impacts to local communities, which is a very critical, but the entire economics, long-term economics of these projects. And I've been seeing some people saying, for example, that that if we really had to look at all the scenarios of GLOF, we'll never be able to build an viable hydropower project, because they were looking at the CWC's modeling from 2005, where it said depending on how many lakes burst, you may have 7,000 between 6,000 to 30,000 QMX coming down. of water, and we can never. In that case, you shouldn't be building projects at some of these locations which are at these risks. And very often we see that uh, we take the clearances given by the central agencies, Central Electricity Authority, Central Water Commission, as gospel truth. And very often there is not expertise to challenge these technicalities. But when these things have been challenged, sometimes you have seen dramatic changes in designs which show how faulty the upfront appraisal was. I'll just end with one example, not from Sikkim, but from going further east on the Assam Arunachal Pradesh border, the 2000 megawatt Lower Subansiri project, which is going to get commissioned either later this year or early next year. And a lot of local communities had raised serious concern about downstream impacts, including due to dam safety, precisely due to various environmental risks, including seismic risks. After their protests, an independent downstream impact assessment was done by 3 universities in Assam, Guwahati University, Dibrugarh University, and IIT Guwahati. And after that, there was a series of reviews by several committees, including central agencies. Though they did not agree fully with the contentions of the Assam expert committee, very few of y'all, or very few of us across the country, know what a dramatic change has taken place in this dam design. The dam was 170 meters wide along the river length. It has been changed to 270 meters long along the river length. So there's a 60% increase in the width of the dam after it was built halfway. Okay, so there were some people who like to say if people wouldn't have protested, the project would have got completed and now it would have been up and running. It wouldn't have finished at such a high cost. What they forget is that the dam on which work stopped when people protested is not the design of the dam on which work is being completed. So I just wanted to say that there's such challenges. Only in a few rare cases when people are challenged, they have to address some of the design issues. Not all got addressed, but I just wanted to end with that one example. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Neeraj, for that lucid account, interconnecting so many aspects, and probably like one is seeing two kind of collapses, not just of the Teesta 3 dam, but the entire institutional infrastructure which involves the state government, which involves the appellate tribunal, the NGT and the courts. That whole system seems to be collapsing, the regulatory mechanism. Um, so we'll come back to what you have said and to some of the questions which others will also have. I would also like to, like, after Dr. Rinan speaks and after Manshi speak, hopefully Mayalmit will join. But we'll also want that there are members of the ACT in the audience. So after their presentations, we'll invite people who are from ACT or who are from the region if they want to share their views. But right now, I would request Dr. Rinan Shah to please make a presentation.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you, Amitanshu, and thanks, Neeraj, for your detailed information about the Teesta projects and the different projects that have been taking place. And I think one key takeaway from the magnitude of information Neeraj has is to understand, how there are very few people, even on ground, who might even be aware of all these processes that have taken place. And that also seems to be one of the drawbacks in how projects are implemented. I also come from one of the tributaries of Teesta, that's the Chota Rangit. So we flow into the Teesta, into the Bara Rangit, and then onwards into Teesta. So that way, in the sense that projects, when they land in the backyards of people, they only realize when the trucks are rolling in. Only when the trucks are rolling in do you know that a project has been sanctioned. So there is a lot of mismatch or gaps between how the information that is probably there or decided already at the central or the state level gets transmitted to people at the ground. To begin with, I would like to quote Butler and Rest's paper, where they talk about another hydropower nation, that is Nepal, and how they have done a study of risks and uncertainty. So they say that the denial of uncertainty serves as an important purpose in maintaining the promise of Nepal. We're just drawing from Nepal to see how it implies for the Eastern Himalaya region as a future hydropower nation. As with many financial devices, it helps to obscure the fact those who make a living with the financialization of risk are seldom those who have to live with uncertainties produced by its ramifications. And this is what we have seen in the case of Sikkim also, is that the decisions might be made far off or close enough, but the ramifications are faced by people who live immediately around it. In order to carry my talk for my session forward, I would like to place Sikkim and the northeastern region and the eastern Himalayan region in terms of looking at how a regional disparity and marginalization impacts such decision making, which decision making, and also looking at dams and the national hydropower narrative, and how the sanctioning of dam occurs under the national narrative that is already there. Um, uh, I think since it has been around 6 to 7 days, and we have seen that how even the media has moved on from just talking about it as a the breakage or the breach of dam, to only focusing on gloss. So I think the media is already moving a lot faster than we expected, which also then does away with our focus on dams, which are the key driver, which is the key driver for the disaster in this case. On the ground, we have seen that relief has been pouring in from different parts of the world, as well as the locals in and around the region. We The importance of relief is always there, and the narrative and action we need to work towards is mostly towards prevention, and this is something which is important across the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, because prevention, we have systems of early warning systems and all that. But I think, as Neeraj also pointed out, and Amitanshu also said, there is a lot of other information that is already available, and in terms of how people, how preventive actions are the need for the hour. And once the disaster took place, you could see in social media and other parts that there a lot of studies that had been done over time came up, and there was a lot of people saying, we had said so. So all these dialogues were emerging, and what we couldn't figure out was, why had they not been listened to, or why had it not been conveyed or listened to in a way which probably also points to one aspect that we saw in terms of how research policy has been moving, and many a times research policy and governance don't speak to each other. In some cases, where the study on especially on the Lonak Lake had been done, was done by the scientists, but had they even been considered by the policymakers or by people on the ground? So, and additionally, when we talk about dams, we cannot think of it as just one big structure that is attached there. Of course, it is massive, but also a lot of ancillary infrastructure comes in place. Aspects of deforestation, because you need to cut down the trees to build roads. You have blasting in the mountain areas to create tunnels to give for especially for the run of the rivers, to give a head start to the turbines. We also have aspects of all these things are a larger process which happens pre the actual dam being made, during the dam construction, as well as post dam construction, because a lot of allied infrastructure is also something which is a part of the larger hydropower project. Yeah. Looking at especially the Northeast, I think looking at especially the Northeast, we have to look at it in terms of how places of abundant natural resources or abundant, biodiversity have always been perceived by a lot of national policies. In a way, if you just think back, you will always see that hotspots of natural resources and biodiversity are always hotspots of marginalization. In a way, when systems are created, for example hydropower, or even in the case of forest rights, you have boundaries created, which in a way reduces access to people who are locally around the region, and pushes them more and more towards marginalization, where marginalization is said to be an involuntary position at the margins of society, politics, economics, ecology, and biophysical systems, which prevent the people who live there from accessing resources, assets, services, restraining freedom of choice, preventing development, and eventually pushing people into extreme poverty. And when we look at, and this is a case that happens in the Northeast, but also in parts of Central India. Marginalization is can be seen largely in terms of space and in terms of social aspects. In the mountain regions, we can space becomes a very important factor, because we are at a larger distance from the center, or from the decision making bodies. Also, in the case of mountains, we also have aspects of altitude coming in. So what this also does is, we have, even within the problem of hydropower, we have spatial aspects of upstream and downstream, where we kind of forget that a river is a flowing body, that water is flowing in the river, and it is not something, if you build a dam on it, it's not, you cannot simply be concerned about that particular A or B section where you're building the dam, but also looking at in terms of, the different interactions that happens upstream and downstream. Uh, Dams, as we have seen, has also been proposed as a part of the National Green Agenda, where this nation is trying to move towards renewable resources. However, the question that we need to put in is National Green Agenda, is it equitable? And if even moving towards clean energy, who are you moving towards clean energy towards? So what are the major, who are the major benefactors of this kind of changes? Because historically we have seen there is a mountains versus plains kinds of narrative, as when the hydropower is being developed, where is it moving towards? For example, when we are back home, we see a lot of transmission lines, and then when we ask there about where is the power going, it's like none of the power stays in, because most of the power are moving towards the plains, to the plains of Kolkata and Kishanganj, so on and so forth. uh, uh, Overall, I would like to say that these aspects of national agenda building on in terms of green energy, also dams being proposed as a part of it, and where and how the dams are being proposed, especially vis-a-vis the size of the state, the power of the state, is also very important. It's important to look at it in its entirety. And Another thing which might have comes up is also rights over water and how water is perceived, because in many ways, it's till today, it's like till a few years ago, water, the Department for Water had been different for like groundwater and surface water. They are seen as two different kinds of waters, right? And the rights over water also changes depending upon what is the kind of water. So, and in many cases, you have the government coming in, especially coming in terms of taking over resources or taking over riparian rights, or groundwater, citing the eminent domain theory of the state. Yeah, I think I would like to close with that. But also, I would like to just mention that whenever floods come, people, jog their collective memory in terms of, seeing when it had occurred, how it had occurred. And when people spoke about this particular floods, they also reflected back on the floods that had taken place in 1968, which had taken place on the Chota Rangit, as well as continued washing down bridges, washing down households. However, probably now, if we think of it, it might it had been scary at that point, but a similar flood also occurred a few years back around the same time in October. And I think this is like the third big impactful disaster, bigger one of the biggest disasters that is it has been added to the collective memory of people, which might not, it's not a great collective memory to be added to. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Inan, for bringing this perspective to the discussion, because um, one is certainly that I think it was also mentioned in some of our preparation meetings that this particular dam is probably it's categorized as an example of the clean development mechanism. So they have like put in the design and all at the United Nations this thing. And of course, you talked about topographical, geological differences, which are very crucial, and how we should see impacts as well, possible impacts as well as impacts which have taken place in that light. Uh, Going forward with that, I think so. I would invite Manshi now to speak and bring a perspective from which is grounded in the Western Himalayas in Uttarakhand and Himachal, and it's even more pertinent because what some of us have been saying, that we saw the year beginning with with the land subsidence in Joshimath, something which whose impacts are still being felt, and the process itself is going on. And now we are moving to a close of the year with what happened in Sikkim. And in between, there has been so much discussion on environmental clearances and forest clearances over projects like the Great Nicobar Development Project. So, Manshi, I would request you to speak. Thanks.
Thanks, Mikanshu, for having me in today on board. And I want to start by kind of expressing my solidarity with the affected citizens of Teesta and the people of, Sikkim, who are going through this disaster, which they had forewarned and spoken about earlier, that this is like impending doom, it will come. And it's really tragic, in many ways. I think we need to kind of really reflect what is going on, because it's been over a decade since we've seen such fatal disasters happening in the Himalayan region, and we are unable to fathom, despite such a such a body of research that exists, so many institutions worldwide. There is a talk about the crisis in the Himalayan region, and we are still not able to grapple with what is it that can be done to protect the people, the ecology, the impacts that we are seeing. And in the Teesta situation and the crisis that is ongoing right now, what is really, really, kind of devastating is also the headlining of the GLOF without speaking about the dam burst that has taken place, the destruction of one project and the damage caused to the others. And this is something that we've seen repeatedly in the framing of these disasters as in the Himalayan region as natural disasters. And this is something that is now become a pet peeve for many of us who it's even triggering for many of us who live in this region, who have seen this region for a long time, and especially for the people who have been raising these issues. So I think that today's discussion rightly brings the focus to dams, because if you look at the single most mega infrastructure extractivism agenda that has been perpetuated in this region, it is the hydropower production. And therefore, I think it's very important to focus on dams. But though the tryst of dams, Himalaya with dams is not new as far as the Western Himalaya are concerned, because we know that the Bhakra and the Pong dams in Himachal or the Tiri dam in Uttarakhand were built as temples of modern India in the starting from the post-independence period right up to the 70s, 80s. You've seen this construction, which was very much part of the nation building project. And I would go back to what Renan said, that this is the nation does not include the people of the Himalaya, it seems, because there were thousands of people who were displaced, who are still in, at least in the case of Himachal, we know Bhakra Dam, who still have not been rehabilitated. They were rehabilitated in Rajasthan, and they kind of came back because they could not fit into societies there, and then now living in forest lands where they have no titles, fighting their fight under the FRA, still not getting it. And now when we look at what has happened, in Himachal this year during the floods, you have, the Bhakra and the Pong dams, the way they release the water last minute, the flood impact went right down to Punjab. So if the rivers of the Himalaya are flooding the way they are, and there are obstructions in the cascade of dams that we see right now, this is going to just spell disaster for millions of people, and the food security and livelihoods of this, entire, not just the Himalayan region, but the Indo-Gangetic belt, the Punjab plains. So we have to see that the impact is pretty large, the impact area that we're talking about. But I want to come back to, and I have a couple of slides that I need to show, because I think it's important to look at the political economy of hydropower development in the Himalayan region, as it has occurred in the last couple of decades, especially in the last 3 decades. So I'm just going to, can you all see my screen?
We can see.
Okay, fine. So I'll just quickly go over some of these slides. So if you look at, one second. Yeah. So if you look at this first slide, we can see that if we are looking at, so I want to actually first start with what has happened post the 90s. So if you look at Bhakra or Pong, these are dams that were pondage or storage reservoir based dams. Post the 1990s, there has been a change in the kind of technology and the kind of dam building we are talking about, because this is directly connected with power production. And the hydropower dams are using a technology called the run-of-the-river projects, and these are mostly being now built in the Himalaya. If you look at 80% of, if you look at this particular chart, these figures are, I think, of 2018, but it won't be too different. If you look at this particular chart, you can see that now about 80% of the hydropower production that is going to happen is going to be in the Indus, Ganga and Brahmaputra river basins. And if you look closer, you'll see that the 55% of projects have already, 55% of the capacity has already been constructed is under operation and construction in Himachal, Uttarakhand and Jammu and Kashmir, which is the Indus River Basin. If you look at what is going to be constructed now, it's going to be in the eastern Himalayan region, the Brahmaputra Basin. So the damage has already been done to a large extent in the western Himalayan region, and it's going to continue still, because we are at 50% if there isn't a change in the policy. But what I was trying to say is that this shift from the reservoir to run-of-the-river projects, was grounded with this narrative that these projects are different from the earlier ecologically and socially harmful dams, which caused a lot of displacement, large-scale displacement and submergence of land and villages and in rural areas, etc. So people are not going to be affected by this, because now this is going to not store water, but it's going to use the natural flow of the Himalayan waters, which are high gradient rivers, come flowing fast, and it's going to use it efficiently with very few ecological impacts, requiring very little land, impacting very few people. This is the narrative that started getting built after the 1990s, and with the Kyoto Protocol and the coming of the clean development mechanism. If you look at most of these projects, they were either funded by the international banks like the World Bank, the ADB in Himachal, these were the main, and even in Uttarakhand. Or the clean development mechanism was through CDM subsidies, sponsoring or subsidizing these dam constructions, whether they were small or large. But the problem with this narrative is that that is not true, because it did not look at the number of projects that are there. And because most of these dams are being built in cascades. So like you heard, Teesta 3, Teesta 4, Teesta 2. So all the capacity, optimum capacity of the river basin has to be utilized, and they're using, and this is a false narrative, that a false perception that there is no storage of water. There is a dam that is built, and that concrete dam then diverts the river water into tunnels, which is dropped at a very fast gradient, and then released again onto the riverbed, which is what leads people to say that we are sending the river back to the riverbed. What they're not talking about is that the next project is there, and then the one after that. So the head of one project is the tail of the other project, and this is kind of led to a complete damming of the rivers in places like Himachal. So in Himachal, if you look at, I want to zero in on Himachal for the key reason that it's got the largest installed capacity of hydropower projects in the country so far. So it's the hydropower state, like, the hydropower nation, as, Rinan Shah was saying. And if you look at this particular map, you'll see that, most of the projects are concentrated in the same area, which has also been kind of marked as a high landslide, hazard risk. So the thing about these dams is that there is, when we are talking about the GLOF, right, we are looking at a major climatic event that has taken place, and then we are looking at what kind of disaster it led to, and the cascading effect or impact of that disaster. But there are, apart from these, the Himalaya are known as multi-hazard zones. So you don't have just floods, and you don't have just climatic events that are taking place now more, kind of frequently and intensely, but you also have other hazards which are linked hazards with floods. So you have the landslides, which are not just linked with floods, but many other kind of land use changes and ecological factors, etc. And these are all tied in together with the social and the cultural practices and the economic practices of the people who live in this region. But I just want to draw attention to the fact that we are not just talking about floods. We are talking about floods. We are talking about landslides. We are talking about seismicity. Seismicity is that there are tremors or earthquake. If you look at any of these upper Himalayan and mid Himalayan regions, these are earthquake prone areas. And so in Himachal now, if you look at the 10 mega hydropower stations are located in this zone, and 67 other, a total number of 67 projects in this red area that you see in the map. And the thing is that if we're looking at GLOFs alone, this is the Satluj, this is Kinnaur district, and the Satluj River basin has the highest installed capacity as well as the highest potential of hydropower. 153 projects are planned in this river basin. And in Kinnaur district alone, 30 have already been constructed. So the red dots that you see. And this is a glacial river, Satluj. It's a transboundary river. It comes from Tibet. And this is upper Himalayan region. This area has already seen an LLOF landslide, lake which was formed and it broke in 2005, which led to floods. It's seen major floods in 2000, 2005, 2013. And this is when the construction was also concentrated in this particular, was ongoing in this particular area. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this is because, if you look at GLOFs, in 2006, when the cumulative environment impact assessment study took place for this, the carrying capacity study for the Satluj River Basin took place in 2013. They referred to data of 2006. And at that time, there were 40 glacial lakes identified, about 139 square kilometers in the upper Satluj region. And today, which is the most recent data that I was just looking at this morning, 900 glacial lakes exist in the Satluj, and 97% of the increase in the glacial lakes has happened in the last 2 years. What I'm trying to say is that even a carrying capacity study assumes that X number of activity can take place in Y, because Y is constant. But here, Y is variable. It is dynamic and it's hazardous. And it can lead to various kinds of other hazards, so linked hazards. So what is happening in terms of the floods that we see is that once there's a flood, it will trigger landslides. Once there are landslides, it will trigger more floods the next time because there's erosion. If there is deforestation, it will trigger landslides, which will trigger floods. So you have this cycle of disasters that this place has gotten into because of the massive land use change that has also taken place, along with this the climate risk that we are seeing because of the changes. But we can we tend to look at the biophysical and the climatic factors separately, whereas these are influenced by global warming. You're seeing more rainfall in the upper Himalayan reaches, which is also then causing floods, which is again then causing erosion, etc. So I think that trying to, in this, it's so bewilderingly complex, the disasters now, that trying to find an origin becomes difficult. And in such a scenario, what we can do is that we can only keep an eye on the kind of development policy that we have in the area, and then make it suitable and sustainable for that place. And if this is if the institutional mechanisms and the regulatory mechanisms we've seen have failed, if you look at the Joshimath reports, the 8 institutions who have come out with the reports, you will see that they are not speaking about the hydropower construction, whereas we saw in Chamoli in 2021 that the dams acted as force multipliers. We saw the same thing in 2013. The reports were, Ravi Chopra committee report was submitted to the Supreme Court. It was rejected, and again and again, every time evidence has been presented, it has been sidelined. Petitioners have been asked to pay costs. So it's not like, as Neeraj was also saying, that these are not things that we did not know of. There is crores of money coming in for the National Himalayan climate mission. So we have research that is coming out. I mean, at least in the Satluj Valley or in Himachal, we have research coming out from the Department of Science and Technology every second year on the snow cover, on the glacial lakes. So it's not like there isn't any monitoring. It's just not feeding into the agenda of the dams. Now, I just want to quickly just, do I have time or have I exceeded?
You have time.
Okay, so I want to talk about dam safety, because if we are looking at dam safety cells, dam safety policies, of course, now we have a central law in 2021, and then in last year they had formed this the state level dam safety cells, etc. But these are not operational yet, and it's not like before that there weren't dam safety cells. Yeah, so there were supposed to be dam safety cells in all these projects, but this is this is a excerpt from the CAG report in 2017, which I think studied 27 odd dams in Himachal, and it found no dam safety cells created in most of the or all of the projects. There were no risk assessment studies, there were no safety audits, there were no third party inspections. So when we know, even if we have an early warning system, my question is to everybody who's talking about the early warning system for the GLOF or for a landslide, even if we do have these systems, if the safety concerns are not part of the dam construction, or the dam is a cascade of dams is being built, it's not about a single project, and all of them are failing to to follow safety mechanisms, will the early warning also work? So that is, and then of course the carrying capacity studies that are being done, I want to speak about the fact that most of them, at least in Himachal, have been post facto. So once the dams have already been built, now these studies are being done, and the recommendations that the study give, they hardly drop any project, right? They're just going ahead with it. And in the case of the Satluj River Basin, landslides and risk assessment were not part of their terms of reference at all. So I don't see any point or what the objective of the studies is. One of the things that I want to, again, I think I said this before, but I want to highlight it in the context of the local impacts on, especially on the local livelihoods, is that, we see the impacts when a massive disaster takes place, and there are fatalities. But there is slow disasters taking place every, right from the construction period. And of course, at that time, the promise is that this is only till the construction period. This landslide is only for now, and then we will stabilize it with check walls or with plantations. But this is not how it works, because once you've gone underground and the tunneling work is massive, like on the Satluj, if all the dams are built, 72% of the Satluj River is going to be running in tunnels, and 22% of it will be behind dams. So, this idea that there won't be any impacts after, there will be during. And the during impacts also are quite, I mean, the extent of deforestation is very large. The extent of underground excavation is very large. This leads to drying up of, water sources. It damages the geohydrological, regime of the area. And there are, every other year, there are, some or the other disasters that take place where workers lose their lives, where land is, lost to agricultural land, horticultural land, forest land is lost to sudden opening of gates, or some kind of, geological surprise, as they like to call it. So I just want to say that there are disasters happening all the time. It's just that the big disasters are catching attention. And those the dams have basically turned this, as Emily Huber says, this whole region into a hazardscape now. And, this is my last point, who is bearing the cost of this? And, we often talk about the fact that these projects are going through a revenue loss, like, for instance, because the per unit cost at which it is finally sold, and the whole, gestation period of the project is so long, and there are so many geological surprises, or there's a dam break or a breach or a malfunction, etc. And this is costing the projects. We keep talking about that, and there's hardly any revenue gain. So while the installed capacity is increasing every year, the revenue is plateauing in the case of Himachal. But when the Parchu Lake flood happened in 2005 in the Satluj Valley, the SJVN, the Nathpa Jhakri project had to be shut down for 3 months, 3 to 4 months. It incurred huge losses, but it recovered all of them through the highest insurance in the history of the power sector. This is what this particular news item says, that 711 million rupees plus 2.36 billion rupees for business interruption. So initial damages, material damages were covered, business interruption was covered. So all I'm saying is that the profits are being privatized and the costs are being externalized to the people of the region, because they are still trying to rebuild the houses that they lost in 2005. They are still trying to figure out how to get rehabilitation for the lands that they lost in 2005 floods. But here, the company that has made this area so risky has recovered its costs, So I'll stop sharing the presentation here. And I just want to say one last thing is that, in the short run, there's because of climate change, the river discharge is very high. And so there's a lot of money to be made. Like even during the floods this year, where 21 companies, dam companies, now Himachal has recognized that 21 dam projects violated the flood warning and flood control norms, which means they were holding water till the last minute when they should have let go of it. And because of holding that water, and they suddenly released the water in July and in August, it happened twice, where there was a large spell of rain and sudden spell of rain. Well, it wasn't so sudden because they were seeing that over 2-3 days, the rains were pretty heavy, and then they released the water last minute, and this caused a lot of damage and displacement downstream. So there is like I said earlier, that the objective is not flood control of the dams. It's maximizing electricity production. So they're not going to let go of the water because they assume that, well, we are going to make most of it. And SJVN made pretty good profits this year in the flood season. So because the river discharge, also because of warming, is increasing, especially during the summers, it's very good for the dam proponents. And but in the long run, in which we'll all be dead anyway, but in the long run, when the glaciers will disappear, these dams will be like architectural bloopers, standing in the river basin. So and today what we see, what has happened in the Teesta, so they're bringing disaster in the short run, and in the long run they're just going to not yield anything at all, probably. What is the purpose of these dams? And especially in the high altitude and the high Himalayan region, this is a question that we should be asking. It is I think that the core periphery politics that Rinan highlighted, that it's about just extracting resources, coal from the Adivasi belts and rivers from the Himalayan regions. And people and the ecology are paying the cost for it.
Thanks a lot, Manshi, for painting this comprehensive picture before us, and also raising questions from a perspective of the future and communities in a larger context, because it's the communities which are the most marginalized who are getting affected and who will be affected by this. And also adding to the discussion which began with Neeraj, that there seems to be an inexorable kind of force where the institutions are working in tandem to support and push this kind of infrastructure and development. I have quite a few questions, but I also see lots of people in the audience. I see a lot of researchers and journalists. I see Himanshu Upadhyay, Parag Jyoti Saikia, Vaishnavi Rathore, who wrote an illuminating story on the Teesta, and Vaishnavi Vardarajan. One point I would want to flag before we open the discussion for the guests, which is of course like coming from what Banshi talked about, that who is bearing the financial costs, and as CFA we are interested in knowing that who is financing these projects, because for instance in the example of the Teesta 3 project, we see that the picture which Neeraj quite quite well he put before us, that throughout its life cycle during the construction stage it was running into obstacles, and the project at several moments was not being able to pay back loans, not being able to be financially viable to attract as much loans, and yet there was a concerted effort that banks and finance corporations were putting money in it. And that's the question of financial accountability, which we also see looming in this discussion. And we also see the need for safeguard mechanisms, internal mechanisms of assessment, which take impact risks into account and not just financial risk. So now I open the discussion. If people can raise hand or unmute themselves to speak. So, yeah. Um, okay. So I hope,
Amitanshu, if there isn't a question or a thing, I just had one more point, if that's okay.
yeah,
Can
yeah,
I?
yeah.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention that, while you had the CDM protocols earlier, which were driving these projects, and then many of those projects didn't even take off, but they were subsidized. I also want to add that now in 2019, the Ministry of Power has made all projects above 25 megawatts. Uh, they have been categorized as renewable projects, and the reason why this was done is because now there's a promise of going net zero till 2050. And if all the projects that have hydropower projects that have built so far are categorized as renewable, which they were not earlier, they're going to be they will bring us closer to our target, about I think some 60 megawatts or 67 gigawatts closer to our target. So yeah, I just wanted to add this, that now large hydropower projects are in the renewable category under the Ministry of Power.
Yeah, and I think that also links with the point and raises questions on what we call the so-called climate finance. I have one question to begin with on to Neeraj, and this is for a lot of our audience who will find this helpful. That uh, in your presentation you showed that how there were disasters predicted beforehand. There were geological or natural events were happening throughout the course of construction. So in that kind of a scenario, what does an environmental impact assessment do? Like, what is it? Does it have a future looking kind of assessment, or does it only assess something which is presently affecting something? So because it seems that if during the construction so many things are happening, and even after the construction one is encountering um, impacts owing to the project, then how do we understand these assessment mechanisms?
Yeah. So, Abhitanshu, the point I was trying to make is that a broader risk assessment will necessarily need to be doing in as a part of environmental impact assessment. We will need to be looking at the environmental risks, such as floods, earthquake, others, because currently what is done mandatorily, okay, is only what is called as dam break analysis. Okay, that is, if the dam breaks, what will be the flooding downstream and on. And in fact, I'm just going back to specifics about the Teesta because I want to ground it in the specifics, because because many people will try to mislead us while analyzing this situation also, after, as we go further away from the event. So even in this case, I'm going back to the specific words that the dam company during litigation and public hearing told people that we have a very conservative design, from a positive perspective, that we've actually left a lot of extra buffer. We won't even, I mean, the implication was, the words weren't used this, the word was conservative, but as if we won't need 7,000 cumecs of capacity also. Okay, so this is now should have been addressed at the design stage. However, I must add to tell people now that in some of the projects now, they need to account for both probable maximum flood plus GLOF in some of the new designs. Okay, but how accurate are those GLOF assessments? The other is, I would like to add that in my presentation, I spoke about spillway capacity, but we are told that these are all electronically operated spillways. Here, we'll have to wait for the proper analysis to come out. But from what I hear, spillways have not been being able to be opened fully, not only in Teesta 3, but perhaps also in downstream projects. But let us wait for that accurate information to come out. So we assume a lot of things that, oh, don't worry, this can pass this much flood, this, that. A simple thing that the spillway has also not been being able to be opened, which in public hearings you're saying we press a button and it opens. The controlled rooms from which this spillways are operated have got destroyed, okay, in the flood. So I think we need to, but I would like to also add one thing, Anshu, that this financial analysis which CFA is doing is also going to become very important, because though communities are not in a position to finally take a call on whether these mega infrastructure projects come up or no fully, because there's so much of pressure, but at the same time, we also have to admit that whether in Sikkim, or at least I can speak for Sikkim and Arunachal, that because in between these disaster events, at other times, also it's a divided house because of the huge compensations involved. So even in Sikkim, while affected citizens, or not just affected citizens of Teesta, like for example, the Lachungpas and Lachungpas north of Chungthang, they've raised concerns independent of ACT for projects coming up there. In West Sikkim, other groups have raised on cultural grounds and others. So there is there. But at the same time, even in Teesta 3, when the project was coming up and the public hearings I mentioned, in which ACT raised vital issues, including GLOFs, there was also a strong support from a section of the community due to land compensations. So we will not be able to place this debate only in a traditional sense that there are local communities opposing these projects and the state overruling it, which is the case in many cases, but we'll have to place it also in the larger context of the economic viability of these in the context of risk. So it's multiple angles that you look at this from. And just one more thing, Amitanshu, last, that one of the reasons, despite all these concerns upfront, if you look at it, if you look at CEA figures in Sikkim in the long term, they have said potential of around 34 major projects for 6,000 odd megawatts. But Teesta 3 alone was 1,200 megawatts. So one project was 20% of the capacity in Sikkim. So I'm just trying to tell you that the political economy of dam building, which influence bypassing serious concerns, also was the entire the kind of 20% of the hydropower potential in one project, they wanted to push it ahead by hook or by crook, and now you have a situation where the dam got washed away.
So we were going through some of the orders which CEA has issued for with regard to the Teesta project, and we could see that the tussle is constantly to like make the project work financially. Like,
Are you meaning CERC or CEA? CERC?
I think this was CEA material, which some of the material we have been looking at.
Okay.
Yeah, the Central Electricity Authority.
Okay.
Yeah. Uh, uh, um, so there is Himanshu, would you want to speak? You have written quite a few comments in the chat box. Please feel free to speak, like, if you want. Um, uh, uh, yeah. Please unmute.
So thanks, Amitangshu. The thing is that more than Indian glacial experts acting individually in their capacity as academicians, or ISRO and CWC acting in their officially and constitutionally given duty, what we are seeing is that South Lonak, the satellite images from October 9 to October 11 also suggest that the slope that has given away the moraine slope instability and the landslide. And I want to also come on this, that even amongst our conversations, we are not saying that this is just like Kedarnath disaster and other globes. This globe was also triggered by a seismic activity, probable seismic activity and landslide. That is beyond doubt amongst academic community. That is what is being discussed. Dan Sugar's tweet that has come today evening again is being analyzed along with the visual images and videos emerging from downstream, where relief work is impacted. Probably Mayalmith couldn't join us also because of that. That around Chungthang, the water has risen this evening. Even today, the water has risen. Today morning, that same landslide zone has shown further activity. That's what Dan Sugar's tweet suggests. I have put that tweet also in the comment. So we also need to keep understanding what media is doing now. Now that a lot has been talked about on why this globe threat was not communicated in time, why gates couldn't be opened, and that's where again Neeraj pointed out quite well that not just Tista 3 at Chumthang, even downstream dams, even at the cost of lives of the local community, young persons who were working in dam site. So Dikchu, one of the life lost, and I mean, thankfully, that guy at the grave risk to his life tried to open the gates, but the official statement is even in Dikchu, gates were not opened completely. And imagine a disaster that would have happened if Dikchu would have also got blown off, just like Chungthang Dam, Tista 3. I mean, I have had friends from that part who are telling me that it's an unimaginable disaster. While the bluff is a natural hazard, dam designers should have looked at the discharge volumes of a probable bluff event. Now, how much is proactive disclosure from CWC? A journalist friend has shown me CWC latest monitoring reports on glacial lakes. The latest that is in public domain is for September 2022. And let me tell it again, if people think that I was saying September 2023, no, in public domain, CWC has put out glacial lake monitoring report of September 2022. October is a fake link. When you click October 2022, it doesn't show you anything. So the latest that we have is September 2022, which is 13 months old data. And we have other academic concerned people telling us data about October 11 image coming from satellite and things like that. So our designated authorities have to be taken to task. A lot of media reporting will also happen, which would try to give them a cover. That has already started happening. What we need to keep pressing on is that the flood forecasting and flood management report that CAG had done in 2017. The Himachal Pradesh CAG audit report of the same year has a longer chapter on flood forecasting and flood monitoring and flood management. On Sikkim, it had very little, and on Glacial Lake also, it had very little. So we should also think of looking at some of these risks. I think Sikkim Power Investments Corporation Limited and its financing needs to be looked at by CFL. You can look at the Chief Managing Director, Sunil Saraogi, who heads Sikkim Power Investment Corporation Limited, and his open invitations to the kind of corporate entities that have no good track record on addressing social ecological impacts or respecting countries' conservation laws. So we also need to, just last point and I'll finish, we also need to know that by September 28th, before this disaster had happened, there was a gazette notification giving right and making the ways clear for the land acquisition for Teesta 4. So even as this disaster was knocking at the door, and even as the glacial lake was filling up very fast, by September 28, the same day, September 28, ISRO's image is also September 28. And ISRO's image of September 28 doesn't seem to have been analyzed with a serious expert opinion on landslides, because that would have shown that in few days there was something ticking. So that gazette notification, I hope that the local communities gather enough strength to oppose land acquisition in Teesta 4. And thanks for giving me this time.
Thanks a lot, Himanshu, for your input. We'll of course reach out to you for some of the references that you mentioned. Dr. Nina, there is a message for you asking for link of a paper. I would request Anirban to go ahead and then Rinal.
Hi, thanks, Amitanshu, and thanks to all the panelists also. I just wanted to echo something that Manshi mentioned. Just while doing some background reading on the Teesta disaster as it unfolded, we also, in fact, actually saw like there is the word used quite often these days is to turn adversities into opportunities. So it seems like you mentioned, the climate crisis and the warming and the melting of the glacial lakes is in fact being also perceived as an opportunity to tap further into the and thereby enhance the renewable energy capacities. And actually Himalayan dams being more into the focus instead, instead of being less in the focus, it seems in the coming decades there is a possibility that there will be more and even bigger dams, and the debate probably will shift now into, we are going to build better dams. So that is the kind of direction also it may take, considering that they are saying that the climate crisis is going to actually yield more hydroelectricity with melting ice. And the other thing also, I think someone mentioned in between, there is an apprehension, I think, and that is quite justified, is that with this race towards net zero, there is a possibility that even this can be used so as to justify that, we need to meet our targets, and this is for a good cause. This is actually to reduce our fossil carbon footprint and the fossil fuels, and hence all kind of questions when it comes to renewables or big renewables, be it solar or hydro, are going to be sidelined and being looked upon in a negative manner by saying that these are questions that actually are posing obstacles in the path of a green future. I mean, then actually turning many of the things that several people have been saying, activists have been raising into actually, right now they're called anti-development. Now they also can also be called anti-green energy, or so to speak. So there is a risk of environmental implications, social implications being further overlooked, particularly when it comes to renewables, by saying that it's a noble cause and it's no longer coal. So that kind of a possibility probably also exists, is an apprehension that comes. And of course, like we have seen in this instance, as per reports and court proceedings and court papers, we have known that, say for instance, Life Insurance Corporation or Punjab National Bank, Canara Bank, several of the public sector banks had invested in these threats. Of course, the question does arise as to why financial institutions, like Amitanshu said, should be investing in these kinds of projects. But there is also a risk that there will be further more justification in the coming years to do so, and that gets legitimized by saying, we are going towards a green future, and for that it is necessary.
So should we let Mrinal speak and then the panelists can respond? Mrinal, you can go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thanks to all the speakers, very well articulated all the points. And I think this is the incident in the events rather in Sikkim have, renewed interest, I think, right now, right, for everyone in the last Sikkim as well as the events that happened. Anyway, my point is more specific in the sense that, we have been having meetings in Assam and in the Northeast recently. And one of the things that people have been asking is that, can't we file cases, against the companies? In our case, often it will be NHPC, whether in Arunachal Pradesh or even in Bhutan. Though they are in Bhutan, in a foreign country, all these are being built with Indian money and by Indian companies, right? So is it possible really to kind of, file cases against these companies and ask for compensation? Because it's not just when there's a major event. Every year, for instance, in Assam, and you're taking the downstream of the Kurichu, and you're looking at rivers like Pagladia and Beki, where you'll have, flash flooding happening. This is relatively new. This is something that started happening after the dam started coming up in the upstream. We're having a massive impact. Normally, right now, what's happening is the government is trying to kind of respond to the situation by, giving the kind of compensation that comes under the, relief manuals that they have in this case, right? But that's not really compensation. That's only something to, help you tide through a very limited, time of crisis, right? But there's a larger crisis, larger impact that happens in terms of, people's homes being destroyed, properties being destroyed, not being able to farm for years, and then having infrastructure like embankment. Okay, I'm not getting into the embankment controversy here, but the fact that, you have infrastructure like embankments which are tearing apart, and, large part of the farmlands getting, sand cast, consequent to which people are not able to farm for years, right? So my simple question is, having said all that, is that, what are the possibilities for setting up, taking cases against companies as well as governments. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mrinal, for those points. So it was mentioned in the chat that there are people from Sikkim who are still in the meeting. So if there is anyone who would want to speak, please go ahead, raise your hand, unmute yourself, and speak. I'll ask just one question, and then we can request the panelists to respond to what has been said. So there was a talk. Dr. Rinan Shah had talked about the regional and even other kind of disparities which affect how hydropower development takes place, what kind of effects it has. So there is also this narrative and reports as well which say that a lot of locals benefit a lot in terms of being contractors. So it sort of plays into the local, and there was a discussion of local communities as well. So there has been reports saying that this development also plays upon the local inequalities. So there are people who get contracts, who get jobs in different kinds of capacities. So if Dr. Rinan would want to speak something on this. So now I request the speakers to respond to any specific question and all of the questions and their thoughts. Yeah.
Hi, I'll just respond to the question on local inequalities. I think, not I think, I mean, it is a matter of fact that, we have all this while, when we talk about communities, there has been a whole critique of how we look at communities, right? In many cases, we tend to look at communities as a homogeneous whole, but that rarely is the case, because there are winners and losers at probably the local level also. So, but in terms of contract and who gets the contract, I would like to bring an instance of Darjeeling, because there is also where I worked, and in terms of how and who gets the contract, in many cases when tenders have been floated, for example, in the case of Darjeeling, the contractors do not want to apply for it, for one, it being a politically volatile region, and in other, that they had to float the tender for like 4-5 times, because they were not finding people to take up the contracts. One thing, because it was immediately after a political strike, but also could be and that's how the people from outside were not willing to. But even within the community, in many ways, the investments are very large. And my basic understanding is that, who would be able to take such kind of investments on? Because even in the contract business, you have to make investments of large. One is on the aspect of how much investment is needed, and secondly, in terms of the technicalities of dam building, right? For the roads, infrastructure, other things are, it's like an everyday thing, but dams require, we think that they require, but we're not really sure. And even in such cases, what has happened is also about how, in the case of carrying out projects in the mountains, it's mostly engineers who come from the plains. So what that has also been an understanding of not only how civil engineering or how hydrology or geology is taught, is understood by the folks, but also how it is taught in mainstream, because it is usually taught in the old school way, where every geography is considered the same with no nuances. So even if you would want a locally developed knowledge on infrastructure, that would be something which would be hard to come by. And I think I want to add on to about something. I don't know if you want to ask that later, or about, I can just add it right now about what probably can we expect, going forward. So one thing is about how, the news, media is already moving on, and probably that's some place which we might need to be aware of by focusing and keeping dam at the center of the conversation. In terms of another big whammy this year was also the Forest Conservation Amendment Act, the 2023, which we do not know what the implications are going to be, because that has given probably full reins, and that would be probably another discussion. And that is things are not getting better overall. And in terms of civil society and better articulation, I feel there is a lot of room for civil awareness and solidarity to emerge, because ACT is already has a large presence, but we would also require more spaces like this that could enhance what the work that ACT is already doing, and also contribute novel perspectives too. And yeah, and that is my hope for the future. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Rinan. Neeraj and Manshi, please go ahead and respond to some of the issues which were raised. Right.
I'll respond to what Mrinal said, though I don't think I'm fully competent to respond, but I'll respond to the extent I can. See, in such events, though, some of this seems obvious to us, the challenge in litigations happens in proving causality. Okay, see, because this is the challenge in reality, because the system is biased to protect the large infrastructure projects and their role in these things. So for a brief while after these events like Uttarakhand 2013, others, there is some receptivity, but actually when it comes to litigation, so I would say maybe one can look at the Sikkim case, and especially because data is known on, now for example, I said to you that the spillway capacity was less. They didn't account for GLOF. Now the answer is, but the permissions are there from the Central Electricity Authority. The Central Water Commission gave this as the probable maximum flood. So I'm just very skeptical, but I don't want to lose hope also, because we've had a mixed luck with courts on this also. But I would say that one will have to be maybe take something on a case-to-case basis. But prima facie, I feel that the challenge is in proving causality of the role of these infrastructure projects in a court of law. It may seem obvious to us, but I'm just trying to say over in that.
Okay. Manshi, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'll add to the skepticism in terms of the regulatory the institutions as well as courts. I think the experience has been mixed, but I think that more tiring and not yielding the kind of results. Even if we get a good order, its implementation becomes an issue. As far as culpability is concerned, we have really no examples. I think that what would be interesting to explore anyway is especially after Sikkim, and once things become a little clearer about what all has happened, and it's very documented, is that that they cannot get away by saying act of God, and whether climatic events which are well known can be called force mazu, which is basically a clause that is used by companies. It's the contracts that they sign with the so NHPC will suppose Patel Engineering or HCC is doing, or L&T is doing their work on the ground. They'll get into contracts which will say that if there is a geological surprise or an act of God, then they are not culpable or liable for the losses. These contracts are being signed by, are drafted by the Ministry of Power. So how are we going to establish culpability? Perhaps by challenging these kind of contracts, because we can say that climate research had already forewarned about these events. Also to kind of one more thing that I want to bring in terms of the law. So you have the National Disaster Management Act 2005. And of course, it looks at, 4-5 aspects. One is rescue, recovery, reconstruction, rehabilitation, and prevention also. Now, and it's not just for natural disasters. The act in its definition of disaster spells out or defines disasters as even caused due to any kind of project or developmental activity or human intervention. So I think that, of course, the NDMA has only focused on rescue and recovery, and looking at Sikkim, it seems that, in the western, at least in Himachal's case, there was rescue recovery, but that was entirely handled by the state with very little support from the national government. And despite repeated demands from the civil society and activists in the state, it was not declared a national disaster, and there hasn't been financial help forthcoming. So this is another vulnerability of the Himalayan states, is that the financial dependence on the center, because these are small states, sources of revenue are small. This compulsion to earn revenue through mass tourism and hydro production, at the same time really not being able to come out of this cycle of disasters, now it's become even more devastating. So I think that if the central government is not sensitive, then getting attention to the Himalayan states, and like I said before, that now the dams are going to come up, are all focusing on Arunachal and the entire Brahmaputra river basin. It's going to be something that really needs to be worked on, and what is needed perhaps is more dialogue and exchange amongst communities in the Himalayan region, amongst diverse communities. Yes, there are institutional mechanisms, but I think that we need a robust civil society and a people's response and clarity on many of these issues. I think this is very important. As a way forward, I would say that this is something that we need to think about.
Yeah, this is probably the straw which one can hold on to after a picture which we went through this discussion, and we know the difficulties. Vaishnavi, if you wish to speak, you are welcome to unmute and speak. Are there any last questions? We can have a last round of questions or comments. It's quite, we really hope that Mayalmit could join. We were calling her almost on a daily basis just to make sure that that's something which happens. But we just hope that she's safe and helping a community there, for which because the bridge has collapsed, and she was involved in the rescue works as well. And I think last time we talked to her, she had gone beyond Chung Thong. Hopefully, we'll have another opportunity to have her on board. So, if nobody has comments, then we can finish this meeting. It was really good, and probably one historical point which Manshi had mentioned in her presentation, which is about like the post-colonial history of India, holding dams as synonymous with development and a certain probably that had more socialist overtones, but the fact of big infrastructure standing in for development and prosperity, that ideology seems to be very strong and percolating through not just the government circles, but even among large sections of population. And in addition to the policy measures, the activism, the uh, the room which the climate crisis, the discussion which the climate crisis has opened up and probably increased awareness. So we probably need to also take into account the ideological hold of what we are confronting. Uh, are there any last comments, or we can end otherwise? Okay, thanks a lot everyone for attending and giving us your time, and thanks a lot for a lot of groups which shared the invitation of the webinar. And we will be coming out with a perspective on the financials which are involved and the kind of accountability which financial institutions also need to bear, because that that is a spot where we really want to throw some light, which is, it's a limited thing, but still. So yeah, thanks a lot for attending. Yeah, it was really good.
Thank you.